regular meeting, Building Board of Appeals for the City of Ann Arbor, April 19th, 2018. Have roll call, please.
Paul Darling,
Here.
Robert Hart,
Here.
Kim Winters,
Here.
Gordon Berry,
Here.
Hugh Flack, David Arnsdorf,
Here.
staff, Glenn Dempsey,
Here.
Kathleen Summerskill, here, Mark Howell, myself, Deborah Williams. Roll call is complete. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. The board has had a copy of the agenda. Any questions on that? If not, we can have a motion for approval.
Move to approve.
There's motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is passed. The agenda is approved. Same for the minutes for February meeting. Are there any changes or comments on that? If not, we can have a motion for approval.
I move we approve. Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are approved on the minutes of February. Public commentary, general. Is there a general here to give us public commentary? If not, nobody wants to say anything at this point. Okay, we move on to appeals, actions, show cause hearing. First is BBA 18-002. That's 33. Is that the right one? Yes. 3380 Nixon Road. Glenn, could we have a review of this?
Sure. Glenn Dempsey, building official. The background with regards to this appeal, Mike Parks of Cypress Partners, on behalf of BRE Nixon Road Associates, owner, are appealing a code interpretation made by the building official for requirement to provide a 1 hour separation between the exterior balconies, horizontal and vertical, of the apartment units at 3380 Nixon Road per section 420.2 and 420.3 of the MBC 2012. The building official's interpretation is the exterior balconies are considered part of the building area and therefore subject to the requirements of section 420, which is for groups I1, R1, R2, and R3. The appeal on this interpretation is to allow the section 1406.3 of the MBC 2012 to be used for projections and allow unrated balconies. The building official code interpretation, there are three-story building, these are three-story buildings, three of them, that are NFPA 13 suppressed. They are an R2 use and are a 5A type of construction. Each balcony is supported from the foundation up 3 stories to the roof structure, and the balconies are within the horizontal projection of the roof or balcony floor above. Each balcony has a wall section that separates the dwelling units for each other. The following 4 items listed below will help provide the appropriate code path as seen by the building official. Number 1, the code states by definition that area building, the area included within surrounding exterior walls or exterior walls and firewalls, exclusive of vent shafts and courts. Areas of the building not provided with surrounding walls shall be included in the building area if such areas are included within horizontal projection of the roof or floor above. With the horizontal projection of the roof and floor above, the balconies by definition should be included and be considered part of the building area. Chapter 4, MBC 2012, special detail requirements based on use and occupancy is in addition to the occupancy and construction requirements in the code, and the provisions of this chapter apply to the special uses and occupancies. Section 420, required for groups I1, R1, R2, and R3, The separation walls and horizontal separation sections 420.2 and 420.3 require the dwelling units to be separated as required and in accordance with sections 708 and 711. The code states that by definition, dwelling unit, a single unit providing complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. With this definition, the balcony is considered part of the living area of an apartment dwelling unit. Chapter 1, MBC 2012, Scope and Administration, provides Section 102 applicability. A, 102.1 general, where there is a conflict between a general requirement and a specific requirement, the specific requirement shall be applicable, where in any specific case, different sections of this code specify different materials, methods of construction, or other requirements, the most restrictive shall govern. So, the code path is shown in item 2 is for special detailed requirements on use and occupancy. This is in addition to the occupancy and construction requirements in the code. Chapter 4 is a more detailed requirement for uses and occupancies as seen in item number 1 above. This should not be considered a projection off of an exterior wall and building, but the balcony should be considered part of the building. It is also seen as part of a dwelling unit, as shown by definition in item 3, and thus should meet the requirements of section 420. The code section for exterior walls in chapter 14 have requirements for balconies and similar projections in section 1406.3. This section has an exception, number 3, that states the balconies are not required to have a fire resistance rating where sprinkler protection is extended to these areas. While the balcony may be a projection, because the balconies are stacked and a roof overhead, by definition, the balconies become part of the building and thus should meet the requirements of section 420. If there are any thoughts that the balconies are still a projection and may be allowed the exception under section 1406.3, exception number 3, but one believes there may be a conflict in the code with section 420, then I would ask that you review item number 4 above, section 102.1, under the scope of administration states that where in a specific case, different sections of this code specify different materials, methods of construction, or other requirements, the most restrictive shall govern. Section 420 would be the more restrictive requirement and then would be required. You will also find an interpretation from ICC that has been provided by James D. Connell, P.E., which has been provided by the applicant. Mr. Connell has stated that the private balconies accessed through the dwelling units are still an exterior projection and are covered in section 1406.3. And the exception to the fire resistance rating for the sprinklered balcony floors is valid whether the balcony is an extension of the dwelling unit or an exit access balcony. He does not believe that section 420 would apply to balcony floors. In an attempt to understand further the code opinion from Mr. Connell out of the Birmingham office, I contacted him. He was firm in his thoughts and really did not want to discuss it. I then contacted the ICC Plan Review Department located in the Chicago office. That office decided they wanted to have several people review the code opinion. The final result was a difference of opinion among ICC staff. It would have been nice if everyone had the same opinion, but there were different opinions on the code interpretation. As everyone knows, the code commentaries and the ICC code opinions may assist us in getting a different view of how the code may be looked at, and thus help us to come up with a final code determination. So it will be said that each jurisdiction has final approval and interpretation of the codes, with exception to the appeal to this board, the BVA. As that code official has a responsibility and internal interest to protect their public safety. In conclusion, I believe Chapter 4, Section 420 was put in place to provide a safer structure for the specific uses of Group I-1, R1, R2, and R3 by requiring fire partitions, fire resistance rating of the horizontal assemblies per Section 708 and 711, which is in addition to the occupancy and construction requirements of the code. I would also note that the balconies through section 708 and 711 would require supporting construction to be protected, foundation to roof structure to afford fire resistance rating, and will make the structure safer. I have also attached to this report the attached code sections for reference.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got some audience here for, to tell us about this appeal. Could you make sure that you're signed in?
I am, sir.
Okay, thank you. State your name and let us know.
My name is Dan Harding. I am the architect with Concept Design. We're the architects for the project, and we have been working with Mr. Dempsey on this for a while now. All of you have a copy of this, is my understanding?
Yes.
Has everyone, I don't want to go through term by term if everyone's read it and is comfortable with that, and I'd rather just go more to the issue, if that's.
Is that okay?
fine.
That's fine with the board, yes.
We've had a lot of discussions regarding this, and what it comes down to for us is the building area. While we agree with Mr. Dempsey that the building area is there and it does define the roof edge as part of it, we also feel that that is for determining the square footage of the building. And that the area of the balconies, while it's considered part of the square footage of the building, when you're determining what the allowable area and use of a building is to comply with Chapter 5, that's what that's for, and it doesn't apply to calling the balconies part of the dwelling unit. They're exterior to the building. So we feel that while the balconies are part of the building area, they are not considered part of the unit and the dwelling unit. And at one point in the process, we did have a discussion with Mr. Dempsey regarding the roof, and he determined that if the roof did not cover the balconies, then they would be outside of the building area, and then the balconies would then not be required to be rated. So we have also spoken to the folks at the International Code Council. We did ask them specifically for an interpretation regarding this issue and whether or not the balconies would comply under Chapter 14, with the exception for the sprinklers. And they have actually said that yes, Section 14 would apply, so the balconies would not have to be rated, the dividing walls between them would not have to be rated, and that the sprinkler exception could be used. That is the International Code Council's opinion. I did also talk with Mr. Connell, and yes, he did not want to elaborate on the details of it. I did not call the folks in Chicago, and I agree with Glenn. It would have been nice if they had kind of stated what their differences of opinions were and why they disagreed. But from our perspective, at the end of the day, the International Code Council, who writes the book, stated that our interpretation was accurate. We also feel that in the interest of public and building safety, a sprinkler head is actually better than ratings. In many cases within the building code, you can get a reduction in ratings if you apply sprinklers. And if we have a sprinkler system outside on the balcony, we have an active protection system, and we also have a system that then ties into the building alarm system. So if, for example, there were an issue on the balcony, then the sprinkler would go off, there would be a flow alarm, the building would be notified. If we have a rated balcony, we do not have that same level of protection. So in the interest of taking something as a more restrictive or a more protective element, we feel that the sprinkler system would actually be the more protective and would protect the folks within the building for that reason. And that's, I guess, pretty much.
I have one curiosity question.
Okay.
How do you keep the sprinklers from freezing in the wintertime? On the
It's a
balcony?
dry head.
Okay.
So it pops out the wall, it's dry, and it's got basically it's a long stem, almost like your
it,
frost-proof
okay.
hose bib. Are there any other questions, or?
That's your presentation to the board?
Well, I mean,
Anything
I
else?
provided a number of graphics, so I think everybody has the understanding of where the balconies are, what elements we're providing there are rated. This is important to us for a number of reasons. One, it's important to the project. It's also important to us as designers. This is not an interpretation that we've run across before. And we do a lot of apartment buildings. And this makes it's a bit of a difference, and we feel that the exterior balconies are, while they are part of the unit, they're not inside the building, and we don't feel that Chapter 420 would apply. And we have, like I said, we have provided the information from the International Code Council that supports our position.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Board, do we have any comments or questions?
Where the balcony connects to the building, does that compromise the 1 hour separation?
No, sir. If we provide,
Well,
are you
my
asking from a
understanding,
design standpoint or from a?
Well, my
code?
understanding is that it has to be, the separation it has to be a 1 hour fire rated wall between the balcony and the living area.
From balconies to living area?
Yes.
In Glenn's interpretation, yes, it would be a 1 hour separation between balcony to balcony. There's no separation requirement from inside your unit to outside of your unit. What we then have is the horizontal assembly, which would be unit to unit from a vertical standpoint. So if you look, it's fairly well back in there. There's a plan. They're not aged.
The typical floor plan?
The typical floor plan, yes. So this is a unit and this is a unit. So this wall here is a rated wall for construction purposes because it's supporting rated structure. This wall here would become a 1 hour wall to separate this balcony from this balcony. And then from a vertical standpoint,
But this wall is not fire rated.
that wall is rated for a different section of the code, and we feel that that's appropriate. It's a structural requirement. It's a requirement of the construction type.
Okay.
And that's not part of the discussion. And then from a vertical standpoint, this is a unit and this is a unit, so then this balcony becomes a rated structure.
Okay.
And you were previously pointing out that the wall between the units
The wall between the units?
is not in contention here.
No.
And it is a 1 hour rated
Yes.
with the type of construction.
Yes, to meet the type of construction and also to meet the requirements of Chapter 420. We are fully on board with the requirements of 420 within the unit.
Right.
It's just on the balcony.
Is there a reason why the section changed from one type of construction for the balcony to another?
We started with a balcony system that had concrete on it, and the reason for that was a owner preference to have a waterproof element between tenant to tenant. It was not a rating.
But it was real close to getting it.
It was close, but it wasn't a rated balcony. We changed to a different system that was more open. So it was a traditional open frame balcony with, we were using composite decking versus a standard wood deck. But the composite deck would comply with all of the other code requirements. So we did do that. It was an owner direction change. But at that time, we also believed that that was part of the requirement, or part of the exception with the allowance. I will also note that we have submitted to keep the project rolling, we have submitted a different rated balcony condition that does not require concrete. Because there are rated assemblies that would allow that, and it doesn't require concrete. So if we do end up going down that path, we would not be using concrete.
So the building is 5A and the balconies are 5B construction, is that what I'm hearing?
No, sir, the balconies are considered 5A construction.
Okay, but there's no rating required because of,
We feel there's no rating required because of the exterior condition, yes.
The floor structure of inside the unit, the building interior is open web floor trusses,
Correct.
and the balconies are 2x10s or 2x8s out there.
Yes. The open web construction inside the building is a deeper construction in order to adapt to deal with the spans. And that is also a rated assembly.
those are wood trusses?
Wood trusses, yes.
And then the decking for the balcony is composite material,
Yes.
composite wood?
Like a
and-
Trex.
Yes,
Mhm.
okay.
And it does meet the requirements of smoke and flame, which is another section of the code.
So within this section that you have here, what is the solid red line that's right there? What does that represent?
We have a continuity of our, why is it solid?
I guess what that's my question, is, are you saying that the 1 hour rating is continuous all the way through?
Correct.
Okay.
What we have basically is we have a 1 hour wall on a 1 hour floor on a 1 hour wall. And I'm not sure why
Okay.
that has a dark line there. Because it was intended originally to just be
The dashed line of the 1 hour, that's above
basically
and below.
to indicate that we had complied with the exterior wall requirement.
So is that wall end of the ceiling, it's like the top chord bearing, a bottom chord bearing truss, so your ceiling is your membrane,
The ceiling is the membrane.
and there is no rating at the end of the truss, probably.
No, but it
Whatever else.
it wouldn't need one either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because even if we determine that the balcony is a rated construction, you don't require a separation between, so you wouldn't need a separation requirement at that point, you're just talking about a continuity of construction or a continuity of structure.
Wait, I want to go back.
That
and
threw me.
Yeah, me too. Is the wall from unit through the floor construction to the other unit, this surface, so this line is rated?
It stops at the ceiling chipboard and it picks up at the floor, but the piece to the end of the truss doesn't have a rating,
Yes,
no protection rating.
the wall is rated and the floor is rated, and then the wall above it is rated.
Is the end of the floor to the outside balcony of the unit below, is the end of that floor rated?
I assume so, but I
Yeah.
Well, that's,
I mean, the
to me,
membrane and
that's
the
kind of
chipboard provides a
important
rating, it's an
because,
assembly rating, and the chipboard phase
Yeah.
does it, so it turns down the wall. And it
But
turns
if
the
you,
floor.
I mean, there's a sheet that's part of the end of the wall or the end of the floor system, so it's part of the
Yeah.
designed and tested system. If you, to accomplish that, it basically would mean sheathing.
You think it's
Floor sheet.
chipboard in there, so between each truss, that would be difficult to do, yeah.
Well, it'd just
So,
be exterior surface.
the basis for my question is that to have, let's just say that represents the walls between two apartments vertically, that in a case like that, if the rating is all the way through vertically, then your balcony is really more like an infill as opposed to an extension to the floor.
I would consider it to be, yes, an infill. Because the framing structure is actually outside of the wall structure, yes.
Yeah, but that, to me, that suggests that if that rating is all the way through continuous vertically, that the balcony is more like a projection to the definition rather than a continuation of the floor.
Right.
Because the break is right, the rating is right along that line, and
Right.
that's an appendage
Right.
or a projection.
That makes sense. It doesn't make sense to have this rated here and not here.
Yeah, that would be a big hole for,
That's a
Un-
hole.
Unless the rating went like
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I mean, it turns down, it turns up now, it basically, I
Right.
don't think the code would require it at the bond there. It'd be difficult to probably find a UL rating that would even make that tested for that assembly at the bond.
The end of the, you mean the end of the floor structure?
Yeah.
End of the floor. If you were to place drywall, get a 1 hour rating at the end, just as you have the 1 hour rating there, can that be accomplished?
Yes. Put an exterior gyp sheathing at that line to basically wrap the drywall element
Yes,
of
sir.
the wall.
and so your vertical wall had a continuous 1 hour rating all the way, basically all the way down.
Correct. That's achievable, yes.
That would solve, I believe, would solve the issue. Unless,
It would, but I have one more question.
sure, go ahead.
Glenn, this is probably not the first example of this type of balcony dwelling unit configuration here in town. Are there precedents for this? Have you guys ruled on this sort of thing before?
This is the first time that this has come to me in town. As you know, I haven't been here that long. The thing that, and this came from our plan reviewers that have been in town for quite some while, quite a while, you know, as one of our plan reviewers was a previous building official. He's the one that picked up on it and brought it to my attention. And one of the things that, in one of our recent CODA classes that we had was the area of the building and what you consider part of the building. It's not really, it's considered part of the building because it has these structures and so forth over it. But, and that's why we went with section 420, and while it's extra code requirements in addition to what these other chapters are. So, but to answer your question, have I come across it recently since I've been here? I don't believe so. At least I was unaware of it if it did come here. So,
This is the first time, I've been on the board for at least 25 years. This is the first time I've heard of this condition. 40 years ago, I lived in an apartment that had the same thing here with unprotected balcony, even though there was a projection of the roof. It was an unprotected structure, so I don't think, I don't know what the previous code
yeah,
allowed, or if there was a change from previous code to the current code.
There is not a change from previous code to the 2012, nor is there a fundamental change from the 2012 to the 2015 in this specific section. And yes, we could probably find thousands of examples
Yes.
of a balcony that is an unrated condition with roof over it. But we would prefer to go on the merits of the code requirements themselves.
Sure.
What is kind of the intended use of these balconies? Is this kind of tables, so they're gonna prohibit grills on these balconies? It's kind of a risk of what's on these balconies from a
Prohibited
fire
grills, right?
perspective.
Yeah,
No
absolutely.
grills.
Do you mind if I? So,
Adam is the
my name's
property
Adam
owner.
Blesnak. I'm with Woodbury Management. Will be the management company we currently operate the Woodbury Gardens apartments that are located at Stadium and Industrial down behind where Lucky Market is. And you know, we currently have some townhomes. We have 128 townhomes at the property, and roughly 25 years ago, we added some wood decks on the back of those buildings. And we've maintained community rules at all properties that we've managed, including, we used to manage the Woodland Muse apartments, the Signature Club apartments, Traver Ridge, and all of those properties that we've managed, we've maintained no no open flames of any kind on the balcony whatsoever for fire safety purposes.
It's helpful to understand how they're being used, because it would reduce the flame risk from anything on the outside as well as anything on the inside burning through and spreading floor to floor. I think that's, we're trying to prohibit floor to floor, something that would spread.
Those policies are obviously, our insurance company to provide insurance on these dwelling units will be, they'll require those rules to be posted and signed for by each of our residents.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
And you're in agreement that the balconies wouldn't be required to be sprinkled, so if we approve this, that the sprinkler head in the deck that would protect the balcony would be supplemental to the code?
I
Or is there
think
interpretation
the
of the-
suppression, I think you're gonna still need to suppress it, or I need to see, you have to provide,
balconies,
Yeah.
according to NFPA 13, which would be the requirement, section 815.7.
non-combustible materials.
Yes.
No combustible out there.
Light or ordinary hazard, this is an exception to providing it on the exterior of the building. Light or ordinary hazard occupancies, which we would consider residential to be, where non-combustible or limited combustible ceilings are directly attached to the bottom or this is what I was looking for. Sprinklers shall be permitted to be omitted from below the exterior projections of combustible construction, provided the exposed finished material on the exterior are non-combustible, limited combustible, or fire retardant treated wood as specified in NFPA 703. So basically, we would be
You say you'd be required, because you're
an
probably,
exterior projection of, at that point, we would have to change from traditional lumber or a non-treated lumber. We would have to go to a treated lumber.
so you can get treated and fire retardant treated, you're gonna get both, pressure treated and fire retardant treated?
If we were to eliminate
The ceiling, so that's what you're showing though. so-
Right. So, but in our condition where we would go with a untreated, so if we have a concealed, we have that structure, if we are going with it as a rated construction, we have a non-combustible surface on the bottom side of that, and then we do not have to have a sprinkler, because we basically have gypboard on the underside and we have a surface on the top. So we have that, and it's allowed it's not required to be sprinkled as a concealed space within the code sections as required here, and because we have the non-combustible surface on the underside, it would comply with that exception.
But you're getting rid of the underside finish, right? You're exposing it, aren't you? There's no.
If
there's
we
no-
expose the inside finish and have it as a non-rated projected balcony, we would have a sprinkler.
It would trigger you, so it's no longer supplemental, it would be required.
So
Yeah.
if we enclose it, we don't have to have a sprinkler. If we leave it open, we have to have a sprinkler.
But you intend to have a sprinkler in any case, am I correct?
Yeah. It's gonna be open, so it's gonna be required to be sprinkled, so.
If
the
we
question
want to
is-
be open, we need to have a sprinkler,
Yeah,
because that's the exception for us.
Yeah.
If we are going to enclose it, we are
Yeah.
not going to have a sprinkler, because there is an exception that says that we don't have to have a sprinkler in that application.
So once you unclose it, the sprinkling is no longer supplemental, it's required. So the question was, were you providing that in lieu of the rating, but it's
No, it's
part of the same process.
to open it up, the sprinkler is a requirement.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, in our opinion, the sprinkler is better than the protection.
If I might add one thing to this, the other part of this structure, this construction, from foundation to roof, you have, there's supporting members in there. And when you get into 420, it sends you to the chapter 7, 708 and 711, and it indicates that those supporting members should also be protected. Not just fire rated, but they should be protected because of that particular code section. So when we found that in chapter 4, 420, and we consider it part of that structure, it's in the building area, we're able to get to these other sections that allow us to protect that, those headers and those supporting members that are holding up that whole structure to the roof?
Our structure of the building and the exterior wall envelope does comply with all of that.
It's just a bearing wall building, right?
This is yes, it's a bearing wall building.
And I'm talking about the outside of the deck, from foundation up.
Outside edge of the deck, well, the decks would span either left to right or front to back. As an open system, we were doing them front to back, and then that header was only supporting the balcony, a single balcony. It wasn't supporting more than that single balcony. So at that point, that header would not be required. I do agree that if you start to stack things, there are requirements within the code for structure that once you get more than a floor and a roof, or you get to 2 floors, then you have to start protecting your structure, your
So it
primary
must be spanning
frame.
this way and it doesn't align a
But this
post
would be secondary frame.
as opposed protected.
So if the span changes from front to back to left to right, doesn't that structural condition at the edge go away as an issue?
Well, then you wouldn't have a beam.
You wouldn't have the beam.
You'd just be spanning from bearing wall to bearing wall
Right.
in that case.
But it probably does sit in a post mid-span, which is not protected.
Well,
This would be a 20-foot span or something on the balcony, or 2 balconies, it's 10 and 10 or something like that. It must sit on this button, it must be
So right here, you have the center.
That's all it
framing
is.
out. So he's talking,
unprotected. or
suggesting
1/4
if they
floor.
just simply ran the joist this way.
You
don't have to
eliminate it.
eliminate the beam. They'd be deeper, but it's not, the balconies aren't huge anyway. I don't know what the scale is on those, but they're probably, yeah.
Is this wall that separates the 2 units between the balconies, what is that? What kind of a wall is that? Is it a structural wall? Is it just a privacy wall?
In our interpretation, it would be a privacy
No, I
wall.
mean, what is it in
What do
actuality?
you plan on that?
Plywood each side,
And that's,
siding.
part of it is when we apply the different sections of the code. So in ours, it would be a privacy wall, and the structure, if there's would be basically the column. So we frame from the exterior wall to a beam, a single balcony. So that beam would not be required to be protected because it's only supporting one level. The column, it would then frame into the column, and then what we had is a privacy wall in between. So we were looking at that column as a single entity.
That column would have to be protected. Because it is supporting a column from above.
It is supporting a column from above, so by that,
Wrap
yes,
that.
we would need to wrap that column in order to comply with the balconies. I think that's certainly within the problem. I can follow that back.
yeah, whatever, we can comply with that, yeah. So the wall between the 2, you're seeing that as a stud wall with plywood each side and siding on it, but no rating. Basically, it would
Correct.
look like a solid wall, but it has 0 rating, is what the intent.
Correct. Now, if we go to a rated assembly balcony, we changed the framing so that we went from unit wall to demising wall, mainly because we wanted to get away from having to rate a beam on the exterior of, because there's not a good way to do that. There's no tests out there for it. So what we were doing is we were basically saying, let's eliminate that as a beam, as an element, so that we don't have to try and find our way to rating of that.
So the direction of the framing that you're going to be using has not been determined yet. It's dependent upon your
It is. In order
successful
Yes,
or not successful appeal.
correct, because under the circumstances, it changes what we're doing. In order to comply with other elements of the code. Additionally, we had looked at, and when we have had the discussion regarding these beams as basically equating them to a heavy timber and oversizing them in order to make the rating of the element itself apparent in it. Because wood is unique in that it will char on the outside, and once it chars, it stops burning.
And I can see the benefit, the pros and cons of putting a ceiling on there. Putting a ceiling on there means you're gonna trap moisture in there, any rot you can't see. Opening it up means you can inspect it and see what's going on if there is deterioration.
That is a consideration, because
So,
even when we had this as a enclosed in order to avoid the drip situation, we had ventilation in there because we did not want an unventilated space.
Cavity, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Can you summarize what you want to do with these balconies? The balcony floor, the balcony edge beam, the balcony privacy wall, the balcony, the underside of the floor structure of the balcony, and the end of the unit floor structure. With everything that's gone on here, I'm confused as to what you plan on doing and what you're appealing.
Our desired intent is an unrated balcony. An unrated balcony structure.
Okay.
So it would be an
what is that
open,
then?
it would be an open, unrated balcony structure with decking material, traditional decking material, and it would have a sprinkler underneath it to protect it, which is part of the requirements of our exception to build it in that manner. We would then have a header that went across from the corner of the unit wall that as it projects out, if you look at that plan,
Right.
we would have that to the post. If it's the interpretation that it's picking up enough structure that it's required to be rated because it's more than a floor and a roof or more than 2 stories, then we would rate that column by wrapping that in a gypboard enclosure, an exterior gyp enclosure. But the privacy wall in between that and the exterior wall would be simply an unrated privacy wall. It would be conventional 2x construction with an exterior skin.
Your balcony structure goes from a header that's attached to the floor structure
Ledger board, yes.
and goes out to a beam at the end, at the open end of the unit.
Correct.
Of the balcony.
Yes. And the beam goes from corner of the unit to the
Right.
post in the middle.
2 things. One, the post in the middle needs to be fire rated then, because that goes on up.
It continues up. I would want to do a bit more research as to the primary, secondary framing, or, but yes, I believe that the intent is going to lead us to the point where that needs to be protected. It's not necessarily fire rated, but it would need to be protected.
Right, okay.
And if that is the case, then we would protect it.
And the underside of the balcony is exposed 2x.
Would be exposed 2x.
And the underside of the decking.
Correct, sir.
And you have a fire suppression sprinkler.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Does it spray up or down, or both?
It would be a sidewall, so
Sidewall
it would
is gonna
basically
get
spray out.
Out and up.
The sidewalls generally, I don't know if they would spray out and up or if they would work as a traditional, some sidewalls, they have a shield on them because they're basically intended to spray below. The threat isn't from above.
But then that sprinkler is not protecting that.
Sprinkler head doesn't necessarily protect what's above it. If you think of even these sprinkler heads,
They need heat to be tripped, so.
you know, they need heat above, I believe it's 160 some degrees to go off, but they spray down. They don't spray up.
So would they go off, or there's no deck there, how do they go off? Would the heat continue up through the tracks, the next level up?
It would be captured underneath the decking. I mean, the spaces between there are minimal, and for a fire, if you did have a fire on there, you would hit that threshold pretty quickly. When you start to get into canvas structures, that's when you actually really run into issues of the sprinkler head performance. And again, this is a requirement that's been in the code for a long time, so the sprinkler head there as an element has been there and worked, and there's no specific requirements beyond that it's there.
So this is a dry system, though?
The building is a wet system, so this is a dry sprinkler head, so it's on the end of a wet line, and it has what is basically like a frost-proof hose bib,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
so that you don't have the freeze-thaw issue.
So I have one follow-up question. What happens at the top? At the very top ceiling of the top balcony, is this fire rated? Is the sheathing, does the fire partition come about the trusses? Because if it comes up here, you're saying that your fire partition, your demising wall would end here, and all the tails of the trusses are open to each other. So if something happens here, it can pretty well easily spread unit to unit through the end piece of the truss. Unless you're gonna put some kind of barrier here that's rated.
I will tell you, this is somewhat uncharted territory for me, so the roof structure is a rated assembly.
To the
protected from the
bottom of it?
The bottom of the inside of the units, the interior space is it's a rated assembly between the rated space and the
So
exterior.
that doesn't go up to the truss? It doesn't go up, the wall between units doesn't go up into the truss?
No, sir.
To the inside of the deck?
It goes to the underside,
Yeah.
but
the
The way that they're
bottom
treated
of the trusses are rated
Bottom of the truss is penetration rating, yeah, membrane rating, yeah,
inside the
Yeah.
unit,
inside the unit.
yeah.
yes. So outside the unit, it's basically treated like a soffit, and you don't have that rating requirement outside the unit in a soffit. You would just have your soffit material, vented soffit material. Again, one of the issues we've run into by doing this is we've lost a good chunk of our ventilation for roof.
So the way I see this is that if you have a wall, a wall that's rated, an exterior wall, a balcony like that is a projection. Right? Okay. The more you enclose it, the more you box it in, the muddier the definition of a projection becomes. And that's kind of what's going on, I think, here. I mean, to my mind, in order for these balconies to be considered projections, even though they have outbound structure that's holding up the ends of them, sort of like a framework, regardless of the walls that go back
Right.
to the building, your primary rating has to follow,
The perimeter wall of, the exterior wall of the unit.
yeah, this wall in plan, but the whole thing vertically in section. In other words, that solid line here that was unidentified before is actually a dotted red line,
Yes.
right?
It's intended to say that we have, that is the line of our
Of
exterior,
your
our
exterior-
exterior wall rating. Yes.
Rated wall, okay.
Like you said, it's clear as mud.
Well,
Well, I think he cleared up a little bit what questions I had. Any other comments or questions from the board or building department?
I'm not clear on a management practice. Is barbecuing on the deck prohibited? Is that-
Correct.
Correct.
No open flame, correct? No open flame on the deck.
they post this sign.
Yeah, they post the sign.
This, I'm not aware of many fires on balconies. Can the fire department help me?
Sure, I mean, we have had some fires on balconies. I haven't seen any on sprinkler balconies. A lot of them are smoking related. So they're smoking and they carelessly, toss their cigarette or ashes or whatever, and they might be able to do it 100 times, but it's just that extra time where it's extra dry, or there's a potted plant that hasn't been watered in, months, and it will ignite that material. I've seen it on composite decking where it melts through, but like I said, it was not a sprinkled balcony.
Can I ask a
So
question?
based on management practices, and it's unlikely that we're gonna have, the probability of a fire is lower, would you say? Do we have fires on balconies mostly in student areas? I don't mean to disparage students, but.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we understand. Yeah,
Sometimes our judgment is compromised.
we have no,
I guess my question as the fire marshal, is your preference a protected balcony or a sprinkled balcony?
Well, I basically have to go with what the code says, so that's the whole thing.
And I
It's the
understand that
interpretation
we
of
are
the code.
debating whether or not it's a protected balcony or not a protected balcony. Part of the element is protection. We do end up with the code interpretation, we end up with a protected balcony, no sprinkler, unprotected balcony, sprinkler.
And I
From
would
just from
agree
a
that.
fire marshal standpoint, is your preference sprinklers or rated?
I mean, I agree that the active protection of a sprinkler head is ideal. Ideal, it would be both, to having the physical protection. But yeah, I do like the active protection of a sprinkler head. That's in theory. Sometimes in practice, if like you had mentioned about the accumulation of heat, it won't set off the sprinkler head if it's windy or if the conditions aren't just right to keep that heat and smoke there.
and the active system, you have to worry about it working when you need it to work, too. That's the advantage of passive systems.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anything further that you want to say?
For us, it comes down to, we asked the people who write the book. And while I agree that there was some discussion within their own organization regarding some of the merits of this, at the end of the day, their interpretation, which was read and discussed within their own organization by multiple people, at the end of the day, their answer was that the balcony could be unprotected with a sprinkler head, or unrated with a sprinkler head.
But there are other interpretations of that.
I understand that, but I also look at this somewhat like a Supreme Court decision, is there are dissenting opinions. I will also say that I spoke with Mr. Collins, and he was, at the start of this whole thing, he was one of the dissenting opinions, and he is now of the opposite opinion.
Are we going to?
Wait, hold on.
Time out, okay.
Just a second. This is the guy from Alabama who did the first interpretation. He was the one who called these projections and stuck to that, right?
Correct.
Now he's saying they're not?
No, sir. He has, if you go back prior to the decision, there was a point in time where he was of a different opinion that it would be a rated balcony, or it would be part of the enclosure. But through all of the debate, because he wrote the opinion and he spoke to all of the different people involved, he was the guy that put together the answer. As part of that whole process, he came of the opinion that the interpretation which they have presented as it is acceptable, he agrees with that interpretation.
So if I might
Yeah.
add something to that. While an interpretation from the International Code Council is great to have, it helps us building officials and code representatives come to some type of conclusion. All ICC plan reviewers do not sit on the same page. They are no different than all the city building officials out there. This is not a, this is not an opinion in total for the ICC. It's an opinion of this plan reviewer that's, and I believe he was a senior plan reviewer. It's his opinion, and he wrote it. So in conversations that I myself had with the people in Chicago, there was concerns there, but when they came back, there was, you know,
Consensus, yeah.
it wasn't a concurring opinion. So we as code officials, if we are not solid in cement in our decision, we reach outward. We check the commentary, we talk with other code officials, we even ask for code opinions, just like this gentleman did. But it's ultimately, it's my jurisdiction and it's my concern. And so while I have the concern there that we're not really following the code opinion, this gentleman has the right to appeal it, and here we are now. But just because it was an ICC code opinion doesn't mean that all ICC representatives agree with this opinion. That's what I have found myself. And depending on different situations, you can talk to different offices in the ICC organization, and you can get 3 different opinions. So keep that in mind. Stay tuned in with the fact of what you have here. And that's all I have to say.
And I understand that, but the last word on the next to the last page here is from this Connell fellow, who still maintains that these are considered balconies per 1406.3, meaning they don't have to be rated, but they have to have a sprinkler.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, is it, Glenn, is it for us to say this is now going to be city law? Or we can issue a yay or nay to this particular appeal as to what he wants to do?
So what you do here does not change anything else out there and make it specific in nature. If somebody were to come forward again, it has to be ruled on by the board again. But it can't be so specific that it becomes code.
Right. And that we need to make sure that that's part of the,
So you
Motion.
should be ruling on the interpretation on whether I'm interpreting it correctly or this gentleman is interpreting correctly, but any future occurrences will not be so specific that it would change code.
But we still have the right to add whatever provisions we feel are reasonable.
As far as interpretation and how we arrived at that. Yeah.
which are specific to this appeal. Yes. Okay. All right, anyone like to come up with a motion on this muddy issue?
All right, I just need a minute, I'll give it a shot,
Okay.
but I need a minute to.
Sure.
Ladies, I appreciate your consideration. Thank you for your time. I have to catch a 4 p.m. flight, so
Okay.
thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
So there are 3 ways to kind of rule. One is the code doesn't apply, the being misinterpreted or form of protection. It sounds like it's the interpretation is the one we would be following.
The interpretation
Yeah.
for whether you would go to chapter one, the one or the other, 14 or
Which
4,
provision, yeah.
20.
So isn't in some way the interpretation here which provides better protection? I mean, rather than just the rule says this or the rule says that, when there is disparity about that, we're ultimately deciding which one provides the greatest protection for the occupants.
What the intent of the code is, I mean, it's,
You can
So-
always provide more protection, so it can't just.
But I mean, in this, where there's a disagreement here, I mean, you could ultimately layer all kinds of protection. on
I
it.
would say it's more a matter of, does the alternate being suggested provide reasonable protection?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
It's.
not necessarily more, but just it does it.
Does it
is
provide,
safe?
does it provide adequate
Yeah,
protection?
does it
Is
provide adequate protection?
If I might add one more item. So in what you're just discussing, you have to determine if the interpretation is to go to the one chapter or the other. If you feel that they're in conflict with each other, then you have to take the more stricter of the two. How you're gonna rule on that or evaluate that would be up to the board. So if you feel that they're in conflict with each other, the code and the administration says you have to go with the more stricter of the two.
That was part of what my question was, do we have to rule on A or B, or can we rule on the construction that he is providing and we add any other specific protection or rating or wording that we want to allow him to do that?
I think as a board, you have the right to add something to it that you would want.
But I don't want to,
But-
I don't think, unless Bob comes up with some wording, or Paul can work with Bob, I don't want to say A is right and B is wrong, or B is wrong and A is right. I don't think we need to do that. I don't think we have enough background to do that. It's our interpretation, but let's rule or have a motion as to what he wants to do. And if we say, yes, he can do this if he adds something specific that we feel we want to do.
Am I allowed to ask a question at this point then?
Yes, we don't have a motion yet. And up in the-
I think that, Glenn, you said, it's basically, it comes down to, would 420 apply or would 1406 apply? Is that a fair statement?
Fair statement.
And I believe that under either condition, we can meet the requirements of those sections. We've shown with our balcony with a sprinkler underneath it, that would comply with that interpretation, if we decide that that interpretation is there. So if we say that 1406 is applicable, we can build the balcony as it's detailed pretty much in there with the sprinkler head, and that would be compliant with that section. If we say that 420 would apply to the exterior balconies, we would need to go to a rated assembly, and we would have the implications of the rated assembly as they go from deck to wall and up to the roof. But we can say, I think, I'm hoping I'm simplifying, but I believe what we can say is that we can meet the intent of this section or this section once you've determined which section you believe applies. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I ask one other question, sir? Would you have any, would there be any objection to extending the separation, the demising wall separation between the units out to the column between the balconies?
That would be basically taking and making,
Adding drywall to the demising walls?
adding drywall to it in lieu of the plywood.
Yes or no to
I'm
Will.
the architect and designer. This gentleman is part of the construction team,
Yeah,
so.
I work with construction managers. I mean, if that's better than the rated system.
Could-
Yeah.
Either you come up or you go ahead and. say
To answer
that.
the question, can we make that a rated wall relatively simply?
Okay.
We can provide a separation by putting exterior rated gyp sheathing on both sides of that wall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Ready, Paul?
Bob?
I mean, Bob. Paul, be ready.
Let me- I have the name of this thing. I move that in the matter of BBA 18-002 at 3380 Nixon Road, that the code for the exterior balconies be interpreted in this instance to treat the balconies as such, that is projecting elements under section 1406.3 of the code, with the provision that there is a continuous rated vertical facade with the balcony as unprotected framing, protected by fire suppression as stipulated in section 1406.3, and further that the supporting balcony structure, beam and column at the exterior edge be protected, with the further provision that the rated demising wall within the units be extended to the balcony exterior and perimeter. We find this an acceptable interpretation to the code. We further stipulate that the specific condition justifying the variance shall be neither so general nor recurrent in nature as to make an amendment or interpretation of the code with respect to the condition reasonably practical or desirable, and that further this variance shall be specific to this particular building and shall not be used as a precedent for other similar variances.
Thank you.
Second?
Motion and support. Any further discussion? Paul, I think you covered things? We're all okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion and support?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion is passed. So we have ruled. You have our interpretation with specific requirements. Okay? Thank you, gentlemen, very much. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is old business. Anybody have anything old that needs to be brought up? No? Any new business to be brought up? Nothing? Any reports, communications? Nothing brought to your attention, Debbie?
Nope.
Adjournment, motion,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
motion and support, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, we are adjourned.